the part of Portland that Tanya does not cover, and then the rest of Oregon. I'm also working right now in Southwest Washington and the Washington area to engage with providers that work with adolescents. We started an adolescent IOP group that we are looking to fill with some kids that need that level of care.
Awesome. And Freddie Perryman, do you want to take it over for what areas you cover?
Sure. So I cover kind of North Vancouver, kind of SR 500 north, and then the I-5 corridor through Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, and Eastern Washington. As well as I work with all the residential treatment and like sober living type homes. So a lot of the treatment providers at that kind of mid upper level. So yeah, but I'm happy to help anybody.
All right, thanks, Freddie. So to begin with, I wanted to talk a little bit about grace and kindness. I've been reflecting a lot about what's been going on in our world today, and so I wanted to do a little quote about unexpected kindness. It is the most powerful, least costly, and most underrated agent of human change. Just a little thing to think about by Bob Kearney. So as we're going along, a few housekeeping items. First of all, please take a look at your Zoom user guide if you have any questions. From that, we want to make sure that you have your names updated so that we know that's how we're going to sign you in with registration. So if you can make sure your name appears on the screen as you would like it on your continuing education certificate, that would be great. If you're dialing in by phone, if you could email Freddie, he's going to put his name in the chat box here soon with the email for you to email him, and then he'll be able to check you in that way as well. We have a new requirement doing Zoom CEUs, and that is to take a quiz at the end. So it's not going to be too hard, but just please make sure to take that. We'll send you a link for that and the evaluation. Once you get that done and sent back to us, we'll get it. We'll log it in, and then we'll send you the certificate. So you should be expecting that in the next few days, depending on when you get the quiz and evaluation completed. If there's any problems with it, you can certainly email Freddie or myself about that. Rainier Springs, a little bit about Rainier Springs if you haven't heard of us. We're a 72-bed hospital, behavioral health hospital. We help people with mental illness that require inpatient hospitalization, as well as detox for alcohol, benzos, and opiates. We do assessments 24/7, so you can call in to make an appointment for an assessment, or if you can just walk in right to our lobby and be seen by one of our licensed mental health professionals for that level of care assessment. We also have partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient for both mental health and addictions. And as Bethany talked about, we just have a new IOP, intensive outpatient program for adolescents, age 14 to 17. And this is virtual only. So all the assessments is done virtually, all the groups are done virtually. And we can put the phone number to call for an assessment in the chat line as well. Bethany will do that in a little bit. We are really excited to have Robert today, and then next month, November 6th, Michael Kahn is going to be doing a 2-hour ethics training. We're going to be doing it from 12 to 2:15. We'll have a 15-minute break in between for that. And then in December, the training is going to be Healing in Action, and that is with Russell Chamberlain, Jeremy Bicker, Dan Johnson, and Steve DeMilly. And it's going to really focus on some of the alternative therapies that we have, like alkaline therapy, wilderness program, that kind of rock to recovery, that kind of stuff. So we're really excited about that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our speaker, Robert Johnson. And this is very timely because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we're really happy to have him here to give a voice and to give education so we can all kind of join the movement and have a voice to help people who don't always have a voice around the domestic violence. Robert is a co-owner of a Better Way Counseling Service. We have the link for that in the email I send out to you. He serves as a state certified domestic violence supervisor for the Domestic Violence Treatment Program at A Better Way Counseling. Robert has been doing domestic violence counseling for 20 years, and he's been a practicing psychotherapist for the past 41 years. Robert is currently the president of the Northwest Association of Domestic Violence Treatment Professionals, a multi-state board that addresses political issues, training, education, and support for domestic violence professionals. Robert has helped set the agenda for the multi-state conference on domestic violence for the past 8 years. He is also a facilitator of the Clark County Counselors Professional Network Group in Clark County, Washington. Robert currently supervises a team of 14 counselors and students at his agency. He also provides weekly training on a variety of counseling topics at his agency. He creates educational videos on domestic violence training topics as well as other counseling topics, and he gave us many tools and resources in the email I sent out to you. If you didn't get those, let us know. He wanted you to have a lot of material around this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Robert. Thank you, Robert, so much for being here.
Okay, thank you. Now that I'm unmuted. Yeah, let me pull up something real quick. So I'm Robert Johnson from A Better Way Counseling Service. And as I was introduced, A Better Way Counseling Service is a state certified domestic violence treatment service provider. And so what that means is we work with perpetrators, not victims, people who are usually court mandated, although we also get people who volunteer to come to our program and be part of our program. And I can talk a little bit more about what that looks like and why that happens a little later here. We're also a full mental health agency. We have about 15 therapists and 5 students, and we provide a wide range of counseling services for a wide range of issues. I want to talk today a little bit about what domestic violence treatment looks like, what's involved in it, as well as some of the topics that were listed, what to do when you're seeing domestic violence, either with a couple or a family, or with even with an individual, what you might do in that situation, and how to assess for when it is an issue. But I want to start with just a little bit of an overview of DV treatment in the state of Washington. The state of Washington is a little different than most other states. We have a highly regulated state law that passed the legislature that tells us what we can do, what we can't do, what treatment's supposed to look like, how long it lasts, who can provide it, as well as many other regulations. This law has been in place for many years, but it was significantly updated in 2019, and it went through about an 18-month extensive team review of advocates, treatment providers, judges, probation officers, as well as the co-owner of this agency, Debbie Tomastrick. She was on the team that helped rewrite the new state law. That new state law added a lot more regulation and created a whole new way of looking at how we do treatment. A lot of things stayed the same, but a lot of things changes also. So in the state of Washington, domestic violence treatment starts with an evaluation. And that evaluation is to determine whether DV treatment is necessary, if victim services are necessary, if a drug and alcohol evaluation is recommended, if a mental health evaluation is recommended, and what level of DV treatment is necessary. In the state of Washington, there are 4 levels of domestic violence perpetrator treatment. They come in then these are minimums. What that means is if a participant in treatment is meeting all the goals and requirements, then they can complete the program at the level they're assessed at. And those levels are 26 weeks, 36 weeks, 52 weeks, and 18 months. And 18 months, what we call level 4, is specifically for sociopaths, and it requires special training and a special certificate to be able to do level 4 treatment in the state of Washington. So I am open to questions in the middle of this. That often helps me. This is I do Zoom meetings. It's kind of new for me to do a Zoom presentation. I'm used to standing up and walking around a room, and pretty animated when I present. So sitting and staring at a box, I might get stumped here on occasion. So questions always help.
Why don't you, when you guys have questions, if you want to type them into the chat, and then I will, at a breaking point, ask Robert to answer those. So that's how we'll be working with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just say one thing. When in March, when COVID started, my hair was about a ½ inch long, and just thought I would share that this is what, how like the time that COVID's been going on, if you can see that. So let me go back to my notes here. One of the things I know you're going to want to understand, or at least I think is important to understand as therapists, and particularly as therapists who work with couples, is how to assess for domestic violence when you're working with a couple, and even in individuals, and particularly families. And so the first most obvious thing you're going to assess for is whether they're reporting that there's physical abuse. That's the most obvious form of domestic violence. But before I get into what else we're going to assess for, let me just say a little bit about why you want to do this. Now, a lot of counselors know this, but I do run into therapists with lots of education, lots of training who do not know this. And that is that couples counseling for domestic violence is the most dangerous thing you can do. It's 26 times more dangerous than doing nothing. And what that means is it's 26 times more likely to create not just injury, not just a problem, but fatality. The state of Washington does a fatality review on all the different domestic violence fatalities that occur. And their determination was if couples counseling was involved, it was 26 times more likely to create a fatality. So it's an extremely dangerous thing to do, and it's important to assess for, and it's important to have an idea in mind, or a process, if you will, or a method on what to do when you're seeing signs of domestic violence, particularly when you're working with couples or families for that matter. And so I'm going to go through some things to look for and some things to think about, and then I want to talk a little bit about what to do when you're seeing the things that we're talking about. And I want to talk a little bit more also about what treatment looks like and what happens when somebody lands in treatment. So, if you have somebody reporting that there's been physical abuse, you probably don't need more information than that to say couples counseling is not necessarily appropriate. It's not a recommended form of treatment for the issues that you're presenting. Whenever I work with a couple, I always say this in the beginning of my session, no matter what the issue is walking in the door, I'm going to tell couples that sometimes there are issues that show up in the counseling process that suggest that couples counseling is not the right form of treatment. And if they push me on that, I might say, well, if somebody has a active addiction that's really debilitating the ability to do couples counseling, they might need to treat that addiction first. And domestic violence is similar in that way. And so I'm going to prepare them for the possibility that I'm going to make a recommendation that's different than doing couples, even though that's what they walked in the door asking for. So here's some things you want to look for. Really controlling behavior. And, I'm going to be a little gender specific here for a reason. Most of the participants who land in our treatment programs are men. There's a 1 in 5 ratio in every agency I've ever worked in. I worked in an agency that had close to 50 groups, and 10 of them were women. And in our agency, I think we have 6, and 1 of them is a women's group. So there's a 1 to 5 ratio between men and women who get arrested for and mandated to domestic violence treatment. And of the women who get mandated, at least half, if not more, were mandated because he made sure she got arrested. And what we call secondary aggressors, where they are attempting to protect themselves, and they fought back, and then they got arrested for that. So there is a gender difference in this treatment. There's no question about it. And how we deal with groups is different. So this can work either way. Either men or women can be primary aggressors in a relationship, but there certainly is a lopsided numbers in that. And so what you're looking for when you're working with a couple is you're looking for control. And that means controlling the direction of the conversation or stopping their partner from making a disclosure. Looking for power over as a way of talking about issues. Watching for her response when he's talking. Is she looking intimidated? Is she looking at the ground? Is she looking uncomfortable? Is she shutting down? If you ask her a question, does she defer to him? Does he answer right away? You want to assess for how accountable are they for their own behaviors, or is there a lot of focus on blaming each other? And so in any disclosure about abusive behavior, you might ask a question like, well, actually, let me save that because that's going to be the next step here. You're watching for power imbalances. You're watching for one of the participants is really tenuous in how they talk and what they say, and they're really wanting to defer to the other person to make sure that what they say is going to be through a filter that they're okay. And you're looking for those issues to inform you about your next step, which I believe ought to be to meet with each of them individually, privately. And in that individual meeting, you're going to ask them questions. For example, one might be, what was the worst behavior that happened in an argument? What's the worst thing that happens in an argument? And when you meet with each of them individually, listen for the difference in the answers. One of them might, somebody might say, yeah, I get yelled at, I get hit, I get pushed. And somebody else say, we work things out, we talk through things, we're pretty good about how we do that. So you might hear real different answers when you meet with them individually. So I want to say a little bit about why it's dangerous to do couples counseling with domestic violence. One orientation that a lot of therapists might have when they're dealing with couples is, they might say something like, this is a safe place. You can open up and talk about things. We're here to put things on the table to deal with. And when domestic violence is present in the relationship, it is not a safe place by any means. So for example, she opens up and says, well, he does this and this and this. What happens when they get home? What happens after the fact? Or she doesn't disclose any of that, and you're going down a path that isn't addressing the primary issue in the relationship, which is the abuse, the power, the control. And so it's important to understand that because they're sitting in a counseling room doesn't mean there's safety in the relationship if disclosures are being made. And you want to be very careful about that. One thing we do in our agency quite successfully is if we have a couple who comes in and we see these signs, and we tend to get a fair amount of these couples because of what we do, people know to refer them to us. We will suggest at some point that they do individual counseling until we think it makes sense for them to do couples work. And that might be a while. We will also attempt to suggest that the person who we think is the perpetrator in the relationship to consider coming to one of our groups. That's a hard sell, obviously. That's not an easy thing to suggest, but we're quite successful at doing it, and we have quite a few successful cases of people who came for couples counseling and volunteered to sit through our domestic violence treatment program. And they do that for one reason, because we help them understand it's the most effective thing they can do to treat what they're asking for. And that's the sell for that. That's how you present that, is the most successful thing for that couple is for the person who's exhibiting a lot of power, control, and or abusive behavior is to go to group treatment. And if they do that, the likelihood that that relationship can get healthier increases dramatically. Short of that, it's going to be a big challenge. And so we attempt to help that couple understand that situation. And if the person does treatment fairly successfully, then we can come back and do couples counseling. Because if you're doing couples counseling, as a lot of you probably know, couples counseling doesn't make things better right away. It stirs the pot. It puts things on the table. It stirs up the problems. And that can escalate abuse. That can escalate abusive reaction. And so you want the individuals to get to a point where they can deal with issues without there being abusive reactions. And that's a pretty challenging assessment. But when you think you have that assessment, then you might consider doing couples counseling. And at that point, you're really looking for to make sure that you're getting affirmations of safety that you trust and believe, which isn't always correct. When someone is mandated to domestic violence treatment, you know, they're arrested for domestic assault. They go through the court systems, either a judge or a probation officer, a diversion counselor, or a DCYF, Child Protective Services person, mandates them to go to domestic violence treatment. We, by state law, are not allowed to do couples counseling until they've been in treatment for a minimum of 26 weeks, which is 6 months, and an assessment that we think it's safe to do that. And rarely do I think it's safe at 26 weeks. 26 weeks of domestic violence counseling for many of the people we work with, they're just scratching the denial off. They're just beginning to really start working. Now, they can have a lot of success in the first few weeks of treatment, and they can really have attitude changes, and they can start adopting tools, but there are a lot of things that haven't changed yet, including brain chemistry, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit.
Hey, Robert, I do have a couple of questions. Is this a good time?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of them is, do you recommend, should all couples be assessed for potential abuse is one question. And another is, how do cultural considerations come into play when you're working with couples?
Say that again. How do what?
How do cultural considerations come into play?
Yeah. So the first question is, should all couples be assessed? I think you want to be listening for and observing the things we were just talking about, particularly controlling behavior. And I'm going to give a definition and examples of controlling behavior here in a minute. But you want to be assessing for that. You want to be listening for that. So absolutely, you want to be thinking about it for every couple you're working with. It doesn't mean every couple, couples can exhibit behaviors that we would call abusive. They might yell at each other, they might raise their voices, and that doesn't automatically mean you're ending couples counseling. What you're looking for is a power imbalance and somebody feeling intimidated and somebody feeling like it's unsafe, and you just have a strong sense there's a whole lot more abuse below the surface than what's being reported. And so in that case, you want to separate them and try to get them to talk about what's happening individually and see what occurs. So to me, it's you're tuned to look for what might be there. It doesn't mean it's gonna be there, but a fair amount of couples come into counseling because of this issue, and it's something that's something to be aware of. As far as the cultural differences, what I find with domestic violence treatment and working with couples also, depending upon what culture we're talking about, is some of these issues that we're talking about can be much more ingrained in certain cultures, meaning, that the culture they're coming from will support abuse, will support toxic thinking, will support power over, will support particularly treating women as secondary. Now, in my opinion, our culture does that to some degree. It doesn't do it maybe as much as other cultures, but I believe our culture is both evolving and de-evolving at the same time. I think there's two threads that are occurring. We're losing safety and rights and other things we fought for through the years, and we're also making gains. And so both of those threads, I think, are running. In some cultures, the evolving part just isn't there. And in that case, when we have somebody in the domestic violence treatment program, they might be there a lot longer because it takes them a lot longer time to really peel off the layers of belief systems that support abuse. I've had a fair amount of people from other cultures who will work with me individually and do group, and they'll do it for about 2 years. They'll do it for a really long time. So I don't know if that answers the cultural question that you're asking for. If there's something more specific, I can try to speak to that. But, there are certainly cultural differences in what we see in treatment.
Okay.
What else to say about that?
Another question is, what are the rates of domestic violence in LGBTQ plus relationships?
I don't know what the rates are in LGBTQ relationships. I've not seen any data that tells me how high that is. What I can tell you is we do get clients from the LGBTQ community into our treatment, into our program, and into couples counseling where these issues arise. There used to be, and there isn't one that I'm aware of right now, there used to be a more LGBTQ oriented domestic violence treatment group in Portland, but that ended years ago. I don't think anybody is separating that cultural group into a separate group. There's a lot of groups that we would like to see be done separately, but there's just not enough numbers coming through the door to be able to do that. So all I can tell you is that it does occur, and we have to be a little careful in how we work with that in our groups. It's going to be up to that participant if they disclose their orientation or not. Unfortunately, I've had probation officers out people, which I thought was abhorrent, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes corrections doesn't always handle things in a healthy way, and a lot of times they do, and sometimes they don't. What I can tell you is that we are going to do everything we can to help that person feel safe while they're going through counseling in our program.
Okay, and then one more question for you for now. What do you do how do you factor in when people live together and are coming to you for the treatment?
Well, that happens on a lot of different levels. So if they're court mandated because of a domestic violence assault, there is supposed to be, doesn't always work, corrections doesn't always work correctly, let's just be clear about that, but there's supposed to be a no contact order. And a no contact order is different than a restraining order. No contact order is put on by a judge, not a partner. And it is a 5-year order. Now, it never lasts 5 years, ever, but it's a 5-year order that says you can have 0 contact. You can't ask your 5-year-old son, how's mommy doing, without violating a no contact order. But what'll happen is there's a process in Clark County that somebody who's in treatment can go through an evaluation with the treatment provider that assesses a whole lot of different things. I'll get into those specifically if you want to see them. And then we write a letter. We don't say this person's safe. We just say they've done these things. And they take that letter to the judge for a no contact order review. And then the judge reviews our report. And then the judge talks to the victim. And they make a decision about whether they're going to drop the no contact order or not. Unfortunately, in Clark County, that is often done at 12 to 13 weeks. That fatality review that I was telling you about says that domestic violence treatment, there's more fatalities at 12 weeks than 0. And I can talk about why that's true. They get way better after 12 weeks of treatment and way better at 26 weeks of treatment. But so in our cultural infinite wisdom here, we've decided to drop no contact orders at the most dangerous time that is to drop them. And that's a political move. There's a lot of reasons why corrections is doing that, and I can get into those if you want to know those. I'm not shy about saying what I think is real, even though it gets me in trouble sometimes. So if there's not a no contact order, then, and if they didn't necessarily come through the court system, then they're very likely they are living together. And there's not a lot we can do about that. When we talk to victim advocates, they're going to tell us, do not pressure or suggest or push a victim into leaving a relationship, which I agree with. That really needs to be their choice. Part of the problem of abuse is choice is taken away. And it's also the most dangerous time in a woman's life if she's leaving an abusive relationship. There's high likelihood that there's going to be fallout from that. And so we're going to suggest resources like the Safe Choice program at the Y, and ask them to maybe talk to them, or maybe go to a group there, or maybe get an advocate. But it's going to be up to them whether they decide to stay or in that relationship or not. And sometimes they do, and sometimes that's occurring. What we're going to be doing is, if we know there's DV involved, we're going to be trying to work with each of them separately if they're willing to do that. And if they're court mandated, then we're definitely working with the participant in the group, man or woman in the group, and they will have some individual counseling that they're required to do. And a fair amount, I would say about I don't know what their numbers are right now, but when I was leading groups regularly, I had about a third of our participants that would want to do individual counseling, which often helps their process in the group treatment. The group treatment is mandated 90 minutes a week, so they have to participate in a 90 minutes a week group. And then there's a few places where we'll see them individually to assess various things. So I want to jump in with a couple of quick definitions just to help, because I keep referencing terms that I want to explain a little further. So I want to give a definition of what I think abuse is. And to me, the definition of abusive behavior is any behavior that has the potential of doing physical or psychological harm to somebody else. Very simple definition. It says that this behavior might harm you or will harm you. And we talk about all different types of abuse. We talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, pets and animals, collateral abuse, property abuse, but all of them are psychological. The damage of abusive behavior is psychological. And I want to give a little example of why, just to drive that point further. If you have a man and a woman sitting at a coffee table talking, and she gets up and accidentally trips and catches her eye on the corner of the coffee table and gets a big swelling bruise, and he responds, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you all right? What can we do? Do you want some ice? Do you need to see a doctor?" The physical wound might heal in a couple of weeks, and her memory of that in a year may be there, may not be there. So let's take another scenario. Man and woman are sitting at a coffee table talking, only they're arguing, and she gets up and he throws her into the table and screams some obscenities at her. And she gets the same physical wound, the same injury, which might heal in 2 weeks. But that psychological memory of that event is going to be there for a lifetime. So there's a big difference in the psychological impact of abusive behavior. And the other thing I want to talk about is that a lot of people talk about anger when they talk about abusive behavior. We talk about anger management. I've been doing this work a long time, and I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me what anger management is, because nobody ever is referred to our program because they got angry. Anger is an emotion. Anger's never hurt a single human being in the history of humankind because it's an emotion. It's not a behavior. What hurts people are behavior. Abuse is a behavior. So when we have people referred for anger management, we know full well that it's because there was a behavior. And so what we're treating is behavior, is how to stop abusive behavior, and particularly how to stop controlling behavior. So I want to give a definition of control, and I want to talk about why we look at it so heavily. But first, all abuse is about control more than anything else. There may be emotions that increase the likelihood of abuse, and anger is one of those, but so can fear, so can hurt, so can sadness, so can shame. They can all increase the likelihood that a person reacts in an abusive manner. But it is the behavior that we're dealing with, and all abusive behaviors are defined by control. And I want to define what control is. Control means that you're attempting to put power over somebody else and take away their choice. Whereas, if I'm going to try to be assertive and influential, which is important to be able to be assertive and influential in life, I'm doing it from a perspective that I'm not trying to take away your choice. I might be trying to get you to understand why I might be a good candidate for a job. I might come in and say, here's what influence might look like. I want you to know who I am and what I'm about and why I'm a good fit for your company. Nothing controlling about that. But if I then decide, well, look, if you don't hire me, I'm going to bring a lawsuit against you for some reason. Now I'm trying to walk into controlling behavior. I'm trying to control the outcome, and I'm trying to put power over you. And so in domestic violence relationships, they are often defined by control. massive amounts of control that is not arrestable. And sometimes that controlling behavior is yielded by simply a wave of a finger or a glance, because the participants in that family know what comes next if they don't fall in line. They know what's going to happen if they don't, so all this power is being yielded with what we might look through a lens of saying is pretty benign behavior, but there's a massive amount of psychological control that's occurring. And so that's why we're looking at control. There, a long time ago when I first started in this work, there was a study done that said somebody sitting in a domestic violence treatment program for a really long time, learning tools, learning how to stop being abusive, that if they reduce their abusive behavior dramatically, it is not an indication of long-term change. It might simply mean they extended the cycle. We can talk about the cycle if we need to, but it doesn't mean that there's a long-term change. What does reflect a more long-term change is a reduction in controlling behavior and an understanding of what their controlling behaviors are and how to address them. And so part of our treatment is that they're really looking at their controlling behaviors on a weekly basis. And I do have a list of 127 controlling behaviors. That this list came from group participants, and if you don't mind, I will share that. Let me pull that up. Give me just a second. And I've been taught how to do full screen. Okay. Now if I can get back to Zoom. Oh boy. Sorry. There we go. So let's see if you all can see this. So I want to read this first paragraph because I think it's important. Listed below are some of the behaviors that can be used to control other people. As should be apparent, many of the behaviors below are not automatically controlling, but can be used to control others. It is how the behavior is used that often determines if it is controlling. This is for participants in our group. This list is intended to help you become more aware of your own controlling behaviors, many of which you may not have previously been aware. For example, on this list, you'll see apologies. Well, apology can be a healing act when there's a conflict in a relationship. It clearly can be a healing act. But what we hear from victims of domestic abuse is they don't want to hear apologies anymore because they see it as part of the abuse cycle. They see it as control. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Please let me back in the house. Don't call the police. I'm really sorry. I'll never do it again. That's a controlling form of an apology. And victims of abuse will hear controlling forms of apologies often. What we teach is instead of apologies, we want to see accountability and we want to see amends. And amends is an act to attempt to repair the damage that was caused. And we have what we call a letter of accountability. I can also pull that up, that our participants have to do as part of treatment. That is an extensive letter of looking at all their abusive behavior, the impact of it, the thinking that was around it. There's 10 categories. One is amends, what they want to do differently, amends, how to try to repair damage, whether it's directly or indirectly. And so this list, I can scroll it through it. It's 126 on this list. All of these on this list came from the participants in our groups. This is the list that they created, that they do in relationships, that they saw as they learned what controlling behavior was, that they started saying, well, this is, and this list, when I first got this list, there are 80 items on it. And so it keeps growing over time. And we probably have a longer one. This is just the one I grabbed up. And so this is in your packet of stuff that was sent to you. I'll stop the share. Let me pause there. Is there any questions about definitions of abuse, control, controlling behaviors? Anybody have any questions about that so far?
I don't have any questions in the chat yet, so I'll let you know
Okay.
if I get some.
Okay, all right. Let me go back to, let me see, how do I get out of here? Close full screen. All right, let me pull up something else real quick. So, well, I think what I want to talk about next is a little bit more about treatment and what happens, what it looks like, how it starts. So our treatment in
One second, I do have a question for you.
Okay, great.
About recidivism rates.
Right. That's an interesting question. So recidivism defined by what? That's the first part of that question is recidivism mean that they committed another domestic violence offense? Does recidivism mean they committed another illegal act, like shoplifting or some other illegal act? And the reason I bring that up is there's an extensive study done that talks about some of this, and some of you may know it, but whether there's reoccurrence of domestic abuse after DV treatment depends entirely on which researcher you choose to talk to. And it varies without a doubt. It varies. The researcher I like a lot, who's been doing this for, I think, over 40 years, is Edward Gondolf, who not only looked at recidivism in terms of rearrest, but he also interviewed families, victims, individuals themselves that went through treatment. He's done study after study after study, and has published book upon book upon book on these studies. And I think he is probably one of the most prolific researchers in the field of domestic violence. Another very prolific researcher is Eric Mankowski at Portland State University. He does a lot of research on this topic also. And so I would say if you really want to dive into that question, and it's a complex one, and it's a political one. There are political forces that want to drive the outcome of that question, and that's a much longer conversation than we have time for. So Gondolf, I think, is, oh boy, Gondolf. It's like the wizard, but different. Not Gandalf, it's Gondolf. Mankowski, like it sounds, Manskowski, I believe. Eric Mankowski and Edward Gondolf. And there's politics around this. You know, there are researchers who believe that men and women commit co-equal amounts of domestic abuse, and the way they come up with that is if they'll do it by numbers. And I don't agree with their research at all. I'll just tell you that. Their numbers will say, okay, he comes home, they get an argument, he grabs her by the throat, pins her up the wall, swears and yells at her, and then she swears back and spits on him, and now it's equal because they've each done 2 domestic abuse acts. That research is bogus, it's problematic, and it totally diminishes the issue of power and control and who has power and who doesn't in the relationship. Okay.
Just one more question about the recidivism. What about return to your program more specifically?
Yeah, what we get more of, as opposed to people who complete the program, what we get more of are incompletes. People who dropped out, then they've got caught in the correction system. And either correction system said, hey, you didn't finish this, you need to come back. And that could take, sometimes that can take months before that happens. When it's working well, it happens quickly. And Gondolf's research indicates that. He says that DV treatment work is way more effective when it's working in conjunction with corrections, and they're working together and they're working with each other. And that there's a quick response. When somebody drops out or doesn't do treatment or quits treatment before they've completed, that correction says, look, you got to finish this. Unfortunately, a lot of times what corrections will do is say, oh, you went 15 weeks. Okay, that sounds good enough. I'm going to drop your case. That happens a lot. And that happens in many, many areas. Depends upon who the judge is, who the corrections officer is, and what they know about treatment. I had a judge say to me one time, I'll never send anybody to domestic violence treatment unless they've done something worse than I have. This is a Clark County judge. The next day, I had a guy who beat his wife up and threw her out of a moving car and put her in the hospital. And he came in for his assessment with me. The judge had already dropped his case, had already dropped the DV case. And I was like, wow, Judge, where's that bar? You know, how bad does it have to get in your eyes? And so, fortunately, in that particular case, I looked the guy in the eye and said, okay, the judge says you don't have to do this treatment. what do you think? Do you think you need help? And fortunately, his answer was, yes, I do. And the good part of that story is he stayed in treatment for 2 years, both individual and group, with no mandate from the court. And he did that because in one meeting, I was able to convince him that he needed this. And so we get a lot of people who drop out and then come back through, or sometimes they're rearrested. We have a large amount of people who don't come back, who don't end up in treatment again, who I think have a lasting effect. But I'll tell you what my numbers are on what I think a lifelong lasting effect of this treatment, in my opinion, is about 60 to 70 weeks. We don't always get 60 to 70 weeks. One of my jobs as a treatment facilitator, and my facilitators, I train them on this, is we want that participant to buy into treatment as soon as possible. We want them to see that this is not just making their family safer, it's making their life better. Because when they improve the quality of their relationships, they improve the quality of their own lives. And a lot of this treatment is about improving the quality of relationships by removing disrespectful behavior. If we're removing disrespectful behavior, we're building a respectful way to deal with conflicts and issues. Their life and their relationships are going to get better. And the longer they do this treatment, the more likely that settles in. Thank you for the researchers from Judith. The more likely it's going to settle in for a longer term approach. And that's going to lead me to, I want to talk about 4 global areas of change that we teach and what those look like. But my take is, a year ought to be a minimum. In some states it is. It's not here. You can have 26 weeks, and very, very rarely is 26 weeks enough. Now that happens when you have a 19-year-old kid who first offense, slapped his partner, doesn't have a long history. The courts are really pushing for, a lighter sentence. The courts do an interesting thing with us. They say, you're the experts, you do the evaluation, but you better come out with the result that we think that you ought to have. So we play that political game with them quite a bit. But even if we give somebody a lighter sentence of 26 weeks, that doesn't mean they graduate at 26 weeks or they complete at 26 weeks. They have to meet all the criteria. It's a goals-based program. They have to demonstrate they understand the tools we're teaching. They have to demonstrate that they've addressed and looked at their beliefs that we're supporting abuse, and they've come up with new beliefs. They have to do their letter of accountability that addresses all the abuse they've done in their life and the impact it's had on other people. They have to address a whole bunch of different pieces, including weekly journals that they have to write every week, and other assignments. And if they're falling down on that, and they often do, they often sit on their hands for a little while before they really get serious about engaging, they're not going to finish treatment in 26 weeks. And I'll say just one other thing about people coming into treatment and their motivation. Almost every person who comes into our treatment program experiences one of these 3 things in the very first day, and often all 3. We'll ask them, all the guys in the class who've been there, what did you feel your first day in group? And they will tell the new guy how they felt their first day. And that answer will be fear, anger, shame, most likely, but always fear. And every single guy would say, I felt scared, I felt nervous, I didn't know what to expect, I was worried about it. Then I asked those same guys who've been there a while, when did the fear stop? And in 20 years, the answer has always been the same, 3 or 4 weeks. 3 or 4 weeks. So I'll tell new guys, make it to your 4th week, and you're likely to do a lot better in the program. So when their fear gets dropped, they realize they're not going to be attacked and shamed and put down and treated in some ways like corrections might have done or other people might be doing in their life already, that we're here to help you learn and grow and change that will make a positive change in your life, your family, your relationships, and in how you feel about yourself. When they realize that we're serious about that, all the while holding them accountable, they want to come. They'll get the 4 and 5 weeks, and they're looking forward to getting to class. And they'll tell us, I missed class, and boy, I really felt it. I really need to be here. I really want to be here. And they'll often stay way past what their mandate is. We have guys that will stay 2 years because they choose to, not because anybody's requiring them to. They're choosing to stay because it is making their lives better. And at that point, they're truly voluntary. We've already written a letter to the court, said they've completed everything they were required, and they're saying, I still need to be here because this is making a huge difference in my life. So there was a question that popped up. I saw it and it went away. I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe I can find it in the chat.
Would it be about what is your opinion on coercive control law in the UK and any hope of getting it passed here?
It wasn't that one, but honestly, I don't know what the UK laws are. I'm not up to speed on what the laws are in all the different countries. So if you explain to me what that law is, I'd be happy to speak to what I think it should be the case. That person will chime back in. Oh, I know what the question was. There was a question on how do you deal with people with disabilities in the program. And I do want to speak to that. I'll tell you what we do. Obviously, it depends on what the disability is. But let's say we have somebody who can't read and maybe doesn't write real well either. They're not often telling us that in the beginning. We may discover it, particularly when they have to write journals. And so I might meet with them individually and have a conversation with them to see if they're willing to tell me, you know, how you doing on this, how you doing on the assignments. And often what we'll do is we'll have other guys in the group or other women in the women's group will volunteer to help that person. They'll say, look, we'll help you write the journal. I'll meet with you every week before class. We'll write your assignments together. You say them out loud to me and I'll write them. So for those kind of things, that's often what we'll do is, or they'll meet with a counselor or whatever they need to do to get through that. Other disabilities depends upon what the disability is. One of the big ones we see is ADHD. See a lot of ADHD in our groups, and what will often happen is I will have somebody with ADHD who's really taking the class seriously, doing a great job, really learning, but they're just not completing their assignments because their ADHD is getting in the way. So we'll probably have a conversation with them about that and how to do it, and maybe even get somebody to help them with that also. Trying to think what other disabilities. You know, we're gonna do what we can to help that person be able to go through the program. And if they just can't, if they're just not able to, then we're gonna probably talk to their referral source and say, look, they're not appropriate for this treatment. Hey, there it is. Coercion control law made it a crime. Oh, it went away. Didn't get the whole thing. Made it a crime to do something. Sorry. Let me see if I can pull
Here, coercive control law made it a crime to control a partner through financial and psychological means without physical violence. It also mandates repeated offenders put on a be on a registry similar to sex offenders.
So the first part of that, should there be a law that says coercive control is illegal? Yeah, I like that. Will it happen here? That's a big question. It's such a political football. But, you know, I believe, I'm going to segue just a little. You guys have your own opinions on this. Probably, you may or may not agree with me on this, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think when we do domestic violence treatment, we become advocates for safe families. And in doing so, we're confronting institutionalized misogyny on many levels. And that doesn't always go well. That's not always appreciated. Sometimes it is appreciated. Sometimes it's supported. We have people in correction systems who really believe in what we do and really support us, and we have others who feel threatened by it. And, you know, there's just no way around that. That's just part of this work. So would I be in favor of a law like that? Yes. The registry part, I can see why that might make sense. I would want to think about that further, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what my concern is about that. If you put somebody on that, you create a registry for domestic abuse, that person who maybe they've gotten a lot better, but maybe there's some lingering issues, I don't know, or their issues can come back. If they now can't get a job and can't get a place to live, how likely is that going to increase the possibility of what they're going to do? So I would want to think about that. I think it would be great if there was a requirement that they had to disclose to any new relationship their history, and maybe that's the purpose of that. You know, that I can understand and be in favor of. But we have guys in our classes now who are struggling with that issue. They're not able to get work and they're not able to find a place to live because there's a no contact order. And that, honestly, that doesn't increase the likelihood of reducing abuse. It absolutely increases the likelihood when they have those extra stressors going on. So I don't know how I feel about that last part of that law. I think it's very progressive, and I think it'd be interesting to just to learn more about it, and I'd be really willing. You know, United Kingdom has a lot of laws. I used to be a drug and alcohol counselor, and they had a lot of laws I really liked, the way they dealt with things that we just don't do here in America. I want to talk about 4 global areas of change for a moment, because I keep referencing pieces of it, and I just want to throw that out there. This is a concept I came up with, and I wrote a document on it, and the people in our groups get a workbook that's pretty extensive, and it's covered in there. And what that is I think that anytime we're treating domestic violence, we are addressing 4 global areas. No matter what we're talking about, it's in one of those areas. And the first area is teaching participants tools, teaching them how to take a timeout when their intensity is escalating. And we have a process. It's a 9-step process to taking a timeout. I think you might have a document on that. Also looking at obstacles to timeouts, why people don't take them. You know, theoretically, a timeout works. I take a timeout when I'm upset, and I don't yell and scream and hit the wall or smack you. That worked. I come back later, we have a calm conversation. That tool worked. A lot of problems with why that tool doesn't work. I'll get to those. But theoretically, it's a very positive tool. There's a whole lot of others. They do a check-in procedure every time they come to class. I think you have that document. They write journals. I think I sent that document out too. They write journals on every time they get upset, whether they acted abusively or not. They learn a conflict resolution communication tool. We only teach one tool. There's reasons for that. And so there's all these other program tools. And what guys will often do in the first few weeks of class, they'll grab onto those tools and go, oh, wow, now that I have these tools, I'm not going to be abusive anymore. Isn't that great? Things are going to get better. Well, hopefully that's true, but then comes another layer, and that next layer is lifestyle. So let's say they're learning tools and they're trying to be non-abusive, but they're working 60 hours a week and stopping at the bar and maybe drinking or doing coke or whatever, and they're coming home. How likely is it going to be abusive? Or even if they're not doing the drug and alcohol part, they're just overworked, overstressed, they're living in a toxic environment, they're hanging out with criminals, whatever the case might be, the level of stress in their life, what we call lifestyle, is one of the areas we're asking people to really address and look at and deal with. How do you reduce the stress in your life? How do you live a more balanced life? And when the economy is good, it often means the people in our classes need to stop working 60 hours a week. When the economy is poor and they're unemployed, we got to look at how they can find a way to take care of themselves. That's all part of lifestyle, as well as taking care of yourself through exercise and whatever it might be, meditation, whatever is going to help them feel more at peace in life. So we're looking at lifestyle as one of the 4 global areas of change. So let's say they do that. They now work in a balanced life. They're exercising, they're taking care of themselves, they're eating healthy, but they have a fundamental belief that because they're the man of the house, they ought to be able to control what they want. They ought to be able to decide what happens. So what we're looking at then is what we call beliefs. Beliefs that attempt to justify abuse. Now, our theory is there's no justification for abuse, period. But we're asking them to look at both conscious and unconscious beliefs. They do a huge assignment that we call beliefs assignment, and it will be repeated again on their letter of accountability later, that looks at all the possibilities of belief. You know, what did your coaches say? What did you hear in the locker room? What did you watch your dad, your uncles do when they were treating women? What do you see in culture? What do you see in movies? How many of you have seen a movie where 2 men get upset with each other and they say, hey, let's go outside and have a glass of tea and talk about it? Does that ever happen? Usually there's lots of explosions with lots of gasoline. So, you know, what is our culture telling us? And I'll just say a quick thing about media. Some people say, well, you can't blame media for people's behavior. And if that's true, we need to let all the major advertisers know that right away. We need to let them know that media doesn't change people's behavior, because it clearly does. It clearly has an impact. Is it the sole cause? No. None of the things that we talk about as being a cause of abusive behavior are the sole cause. There's often multiple causes, but it is one of them. It is one of them. If media is telling you it's okay to act this way, then you're going to have that belief. So if you have that belief, it can be problematic. And let me say something about conscious versus unconscious. I've got a lot of guys in my class who really, truly, consciously will tell you they want a fair and equitable relationship with their partner. And they believe that until there's an argument where their intensity has gone past the level of normal. And as that intensity increases, what comes into play are all these unconscious beliefs that says, I got to win here. I got to power over. I got to be the man. I've got to decide who does what. And that takes over. And that wasn't their intention in that moment, but there it is. And so we want to treat that thinking, that underlying belief system. We want to help them come to, as much as possible, incorporate a new belief system based upon respect, as much as we can help them do that. So that's the third global area of change. The fourth is brain chemistry. In brain chemistry, we're looking at a variety of things. One, we're looking at, is there a mental health issue that needs to be addressed? Is there an addiction issue that needs to be addressed? Is there, maybe they're in recovery, but they're still rewiring their brain? Is there ADHD involved? Is there something, brain chemistry going on that might be contributing to their abusive behavior? And in just real simply, rewiring their brain, to me, looks like this. I draw a picture of this, but I'll just describe it. Let's say you got a field in front of you. And in that field, there's a path, and behind the path are blackberry bushes, and it's raining and it's wet. And so you want to get to one side or the other. You're going to go down the path. Well, in the brain, that path is, you make me upset at the other end of that path, I react abusively. And that pathway theory is happening in the brains of the people we're working with. They get upset, they react. What we want to do is help them create a new pathway. A pathway that cuts a new path through those bushes that lands on, I get upset, I use my tools, I act respectfully, I go through a respectful process. I believe that brain chemistry path takes at least a year to develop. And the way they develop it is they have to practice it, and one of the ways we have them practice it is what we call a practice timeout, which means practice the tool of a timeout even when you're not upset, which sounds like this. I get upset, I announce that I'm upset, I'm going to take a timeout, I'll be back in an hour. Or practice timeout, we say it could be a half hour. I then leave the premises, I walk away, I go for a walk. So if they do a practice timeout, they're walking out their front door, they're creating a sensory memory of what to do when they get upset. They go for a walk around the block, they de-intensify their behavior and their intensity in their brain, and then they come back. If they do that a few times, that process starts happening faster, and particularly when it's real. Because a lot of guys will say, you know, by the time I got to the first corner of my block, my intensity had already dropped, where it used to take me a half-hour walk. It's already starting to drop. Even just the memory of walking out the door is already creating this new pathway that says I can lower my intensity as I am intentional about doing so, and I go through a physical process of helping create that curve. So that's what I mean by brain chemistry. So we're looking at these 4 global areas to address all the different things that we think are going to help people be non-abusive and non-controlling. And somebody, I think, wrote a question about control. Control is a huge part of what we treat. As I've already said, it's a huge part of what we treat in our program. We're looking at controlling behavior a lot. They have to report every week how many controlling behaviors they did that week. And often it starts with, well, I did 2 or 3. And when I see 2 or 3 for the first, 5 or 6 weeks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a story with them about a program I worked for in Portland. It was a big program. We had about 30 people doing groups. We had a lot of groups. And we all decided to do the check-in in our staff meeting that the participants do in class. And when it came to controlling behaviors, we all wrote a number down, and we asked ourselves this question: how did you write that number? How did you come up with your own number for your own controlling behaviors that you did the last week? And a lot of us said, well, Paul put 12, so I put 12, or I put 13. So we were doing what our participants are doing, is looking at what the average number is and coming up with a number. So then we decided to actually sit down and count how many controlling behaviors we as facilitators who believe in producing respectful behavior, who believe in nonviolence, how many controlling behaviors are we doing in our life? And our average number was 26 a week. And so I tell that to our participants: if we're all really looking at this and dealing, and we're still doing 26 a week, your numbers of 2 and 3 probably mean you don't understand what controlling behavior is yet. So ironically, their numbers go up, which we hope, because we want them to see it. We do want them to be less controlling, but we want them to identify even just subtle controlling behaviors. And I'll speak a little more about that. So oftentimes guys in class will say, hey, I asked my roommate to turn the music down because I was sleeping. Was that control or was that abuse? We'll get that question a lot. And I'll always answer it like this. The guys in the room will say, oh no, that was being assertive. And I'll say, I can't know because I didn't hear the tone in your voice, the look in your eye, or what language you actually used. I don't know if you went over to him and say, turn the effing music down and pounded on the door and screamed at him, or if you went and gently knocked on the door and said, hey, I got to get up. Would you mind turning the music down? I can't know if you were abusive or controlling. But what I do appreciate is that you are asking that question, which is what we want you to be doing. We want you to be asking the question, was that control and could I have done it more respectfully? That's what I want to see our participants do, is be asking themselves that question every week and every time they've got upset, hopefully for 1.5 to 2 years. But we might only get them 26 weeks, 36 weeks, 52 weeks. So I'll do a pause, see if there's any more questions.
Well, you've answered a couple of them already in what you're talking about. I would just want to see there, there was a question about when somebody, how you would approach somebody with that might have underlying complications such as mental illness or other physical disabilities that impact cognition, and also like what does a typical patient of yours look like?
So that's like 3 questions. Let me try all 3 of them. I'll start with mental health. During our assessment, the initial meeting we do a pretty extensive assessment. We do a pre-assessment, then we do an assessment interview, and then we request police reports and lots of other collateral data. But during that assessment, if we see a need for a mental health evaluation, we are obligated by state law to recommend that. We don't require it because we're not corrections, but we recommend it. And when corrections working correctly, they enforce what we recommend. Now that doesn't mean if you tell me you have some anxiety, I'm going to give you a recommendation of a mental health evaluation. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to burden you with that. But if you tell me that you, during your assault, you threatened to kill yourself or threatened to kill somebody else, I'm absolutely going to suggest a mental health evaluation. If you were delusional, I'm going to recommend a mental health evaluation or a psychological evaluation, depending upon what level I'm dealing with. If you're, mildly depressed or a little bit anxious, I'm going to say, counseling might help you with this, but I'm not going to recommend or require. That would be every guy in our program. So I wouldn't be asking every single one of them to do a mental health evaluation. We do it when we think that the mental health issue will get in the way of treatment being effective. That's when we recommend it. And corrections will either require it or they won't. We do the same thing with drug and alcohol. If you were drunk the night of your arrest, I'm going to recommend a drug and alcohol evaluation. And I really don't have to because corrections already did, but I will because that's what we're required to do. Or if you tell me an extensive history of use that's pretty high and you tell me consequences of your use during the interview, I'm going to recommend a drug and alcohol evaluation. That simply means I'm going to say, go to the walk-in clinic at Rainier Springs and say I need a drug and alcohol evaluation. Hopefully they'll do that for them. Because I just found out that people can walk in. That's fantastic. So we do those assessments. We can do treatment during treatment, co-occurring treatment. We can do treatment when someone's doing drug and alcohol. We can do treatment when they're doing mental health, unless the issue is getting in the way of the DV treatment. And sometimes it does. I'll give you an example. I had a guy during treatment, his wife died, and his grief was profound, and he couldn't sit in the room and listen to what these guys are talking about. He couldn't do it. So we recommended he go do counseling for that issue. 2 months later, he came back and could do class and did just fine. And we have the provision of being able to recommend that somebody do that. State law requires you attend class every week, but in a case like that, we can create an exception and will if we need to. I'm trying to remember what the other questions were. There were a couple others in there. I think I spoke to disabilities. What was the other one? There was one other question in there.
What would your typical patient's profile?
Oh, typical clients?
Yeah.
Honestly, it depends upon what county you're in. I've worked in 5 counties. Clients in Washington County coming from, big tech companies and lots of education look different than clients coming from Clackamas County who walk in with, the chainsaw oil dripping off their pants. I mean, they really look different. They really do. And there can be a mix of all the above. I don't know that there is a typical. For a while in Clark County, unfortunately, it's not as true right now, but there was a while, about 2 years, where almost all of our clients were 19 years old living on the couch at mom's house, and she brought him into treatment, paid for it, made sure he came. That was unfortunate. What that means is a lot of people who are getting arrested for domestic assault, if you can say your name clearly and eloquently in court, you're going to get the case dropped. So a lot of it has to do with how corrections is responding to domestic abuse. I had a corrections officer say this to me. I couldn't believe it. It was a state corrections officer. Say, if somebody has a job like a teacher or they're gainfully employed, I'm never going to send them to DV treatment. I was like, really? So that family has to suffer what I call domestic terrorism because they have a job? That kind of thinking occurs. So we get a variety. In different counties, I've had different things happen. In Clackamas County, for example, I had the judge and 2 of the police officers who sent people to treatment come to treatment. Now, the judge I sent to another county. I didn't think it was going to be a good idea for him to walk into a room where he sent everybody there. But the police officer did come in, and that was a really fascinating thing. The other thing that happened was interesting, and I don't mean to be too detrimental to Clark County. Clark County does a lot of things right and a lot of things well, but I'll tell you one thing I find interesting in this county. When I worked in Portland, the number 1 profession of people in DV treatment was law enforcement. And in Clark County, in the last 15 years, I've not seen 1 law enforcement person come into treatment. So either they're training them really well and assessing for them, or there's a little bit of a good old boy network, or they're sending them somewhere else, which is what I hope. I hope they're sending them to another county. I don't think so. I brought that up with law enforcement and it ended our conversation. So, so that's unfortunate that there are going to be people who get out of this. You either have a good lawyer or the judge goes light on them because they don't understand the issues, or not. So when I have somebody in our county with a lot of education and a lot of success in their life, my guess is their offenses were pretty severe to actually get mandated to treatment, because usually their smart attorney gets them out. And it's not hard to get out of this, depending on what county you're in. So the state law has helped. The new state law has helped a lot. And it's part of what Amy Roberts does, who's the state program director. She's trying to educate judges and corrections people about what we do and how we do it and why. And I think her hands are full doing that all around the state, but I think she's doing a good job of that. She's also assessing evaluating treatment programs all around the state. When she started her job a couple of years ago, there were 150 programs in the state. A year later, there were 75, which is problematic and necessary. There are a lot of problematic people doing this work. I'm just going to say that because it's a reality. I could tell you stories that would make your skin crawl about people who do this work, and it's really sad that that's the case, but I'm not going to get into that. So the state's doing what they can to clean that up, and they're limited in how they can do it. Okay, kind of meandering here. Any other questions? Questions help a lot, and I do want to try to answer the ones I can. What else do you got for a question?
I have one myself. Are you able to bill insurance companies for the treatment that you're providing?
We don't. I've worked in agencies that do, but kind of here's what happens. Our treatment is so inexpensive. It's $35 for 90 minutes. Often the copay is close to that. And so the hassle of billing insurance and trying to get a payment and trying to, for what their copay might be, it's just almost not worth it. And then the other thing is a lot of insurance companies won't pay for it. So there's only very few that will, and I don't even know if they will at this point. That was years ago. But we just made a decision that the amount of time and effort it would take us to bill insurance for the very few people that it would benefit when their copay is almost as much as what the treatment would be, it's just not worth it. We do have a sliding scale for treatment. So if somebody's unemployed, they will pay less. And there's a couple of levels of that. But, you know, $35 for a 90-minute group, that seems to me relatively reasonable. There are cases where we have where they have funding. CPS sometimes will fund people to go to treatment, and treatment court will sometimes fund people to go to treatment, whether it's the Drug and Alcohol Treatment Court or Veterans Court or other treatment courts. They'll sometimes fund people. For teens, yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. We're not allowed to work with teens in DV treatment. They have to be adults, but are there groups for teens to deal with abusive behavior? Every time I see one of those start, they don't last. And I think they have a real problem with having enough people attend regularly enough. That's a challenge. Now, there may be ones I'm not aware of, but I've had people in my agency wanting to start groups like that, and we just never get enough people to attend regularly enough to make it a go. Maybe a larger organization, I don't know if Rainier is doing that, but maybe a larger organization might be successful at that, but it's a tough one. We just had Newport come speak with us, and they do adolescent treatment, inpatient, and drug and alcohol and mental health. And I know they're a resource. They're not local. They're, well, sort of local. Port Townsend and near Seattle, Kirkland. I don't know all the programs that Rainier does, so that might obviously be another resource. And maybe you can speak to whether you guys have a teens program.
Yeah, we have the adolescent IOP program. I was just saying that I think definitely we could work on behaviors and thought patterns and whatnot around that, and supporting them. It's not the main focus of the group, but certainly, especially if we, you know, there's a couple of them that we would be able to kind of break them out and work on that with them.
And one thing our agency does and willing to do, if you have an organization that you work for and you want some supplemental training, we'll come do training, or you can come to us. I mean, right now, obviously be Zoom, but we have an in-house multimedia conference room as well as a classroom, and we've done lots of trainings there, or we'll go in-house and do trainings. I've done trainings with corrections. I've done trainings with CPS. I've done trainings with lots of different organizations. And so if you got a group working with people, and maybe DV is not the main focus, but you want your people to know a little more, we can certainly arrange something like that to happen. And I do have training videos. I have one on advanced DV training for people doing the work, one on racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression. We have ones on ADHD. We have ones on codependency, and we're creating more as we go. We have a film production component to our agency, and I did make a documentary a couple of years ago. It took me around the country to film festivals.
Oh, great.
That was called, that was on, it was called Entrepreneurship, Creativity, and ADHD. It was looking at the relationship between ADHD, entrepreneurship, and creativity. That was a lot of fun. So throw that out.
I do have a couple more questions. This one's, she writes, I'm a social worker in a medical clinic. Periodically, patients identify DV to their provider, and then the provider asks me to come in and visit with them. Often they're scared and pre-contemplative regarding taking any steps for change. So motivational interviewing is a key technique, but I often leave these encounters feeling very dissatisfied with the encounters. Any suggestions on what you'd hope to accomplish in these types of encounters?
So let me make sure I understand it. The social worker is being asked to work. Is it working with victims or working with perpetrators?
Victims.
And again, working with victims is not necessarily my specialty. You're probably already doing this. You're probably already consulting with the Y and with victim advocates and with the Safe Choice program. If you're not, definitely get in touch with them and talk with them and learn what you can from them. They do have training programs also. Victims are, what happens a lot with victims, and I can say this is every case, but I hear this from law enforcement a lot, and they're frustrated by this. She can be lying in a pool of her own blood an hour after the assault happened, and she's going to say it never happened. And they're doing that because they're scared, because they're worried what's the fallout's going to be. And that fallout can be multiple reasons. It can be he's going to take it out on me worse, even if there is a no contact order. It doesn't stop him from finding me. Or it could be financial. he's the sole breadwinner, and if I don't have him in my life, I'm not going to be able to eat and feed my kids. There's all kinds of reasons why victims might not take proactive choices to feel safe. And I think we have to respect that. We can talk to them about what they can do, where they can go, where they can get help, what might be healthy for them. But boy, we've got to respect their choices, because again, the number one part of abuse is your choice was overrun. And, victims are living in relationships where their choices are being annihilated, then go to the court, and sometimes that gets annihilated. So I don't know what else to answer about that, but I would certainly consult with victim advocates who probably know more than I do about that.
Okay. Another question is, what do you see as the root cause of these domestic violence and power and control problems? Would you say it's biopsychosocial, learned behavior, environmental, family history?
Yes, I would say it's all those. Definitely, and more. There's no single cause. There just isn't. When we talked about 4 global areas of change, each of those is causal. I've never been taught how to handle conflict in a healthy way ever in my life. So what do? I do it in an unhealthy way. Media and culture and watching, what I've grown up with was I need to treat women in my life as second-class citizens because that's what I was taught. So I have a belief system, conscious and unconscious, that's driving what I do. My life is so crazy. I hang out with people that aren't really healthy. I'm working like crazy. I'm stressed out all the time. So you say boo to me, I'm going to react. And there's pathways in my brain that say something happens, I'm going to react. Or I have some untreated issues, mental health issues or addiction issues. All the above. I mean, there's no single cause. And when I work with the people in class, when they'll tell us about an abusive event, we're gonna have them go back through all the things that led up to it and what were the influences. And sometimes those things are profoundly about lifestyle. The guy told me that he hit his wife after he was at his in-laws working in the attic in 100-degree heat for 60 hours without stopping, and then came out of that and got in an argument with her and slapped her. I mean, so was that about beliefs and social culture issues? Maybe, but it certainly was also about the fact that he was profoundly overwhelmed and stressed and didn't have good tools to deal with that. So I don't think anybody has any single cause. It's multifaceted. There's lots of different reasons that these occur. And what we're trying to do is to treat all of them, all the ones we can think of.
Okay. Another person writes, I'm a social worker and I get a lot of DV cases from refugees in their communities. Have you ever worked with this population?
I've worked with refugees, but not directly in DV. I'm trying to think if we've gotten, let me back that up a little bit. We don't always know what their status is. We had a Spanish-speaking program that was pretty active, that went well, and then there was a 2016 election that occurred, and our groups disappeared. You can do the math on what happened there. A lot of folks were either too scared to come because they would be picked up while they came, because they knew they were coming there, or they were picked up. So I don't know, that if they were refugees or not, if that's the status, but we certainly had that issue. There is a Spanish-speaking program in Clackamas County. Boy, I'm trying to remember the name of the person. It's a woman teaching it. She's really good. I've consulted with her quite a few times. Embarrassed, can't remember her name. It's getting up there. I'm over 60. That's the only Spanish-speaking program I know of in the area. She's very good. I think she's opening one in Multnomah County also, and we've talked to her about opening a Spanish-speaking program here in Clark County. I realize not all refugees are from Spanish-speaking communities, so we don't tend to get a lot of refugees in our program. And what happens, as you probably know, is if they go through the court system, they're not necessarily likely going to make it to us. They might make it somewhere much more problematic, unfortunately. So you might know more about that than I do if you're working with refugee populations. You probably know more about that than I do about what ends up happening to them if they're reporting domestic violence that hasn't been there was no arrest or something. That's challenging. It's hard to deal with that.
Okay. Two more questions, and then I think we're just getting back. It's about 10 minutes out. We might be able to do a couple more questions, but one of the questions is, how often do you work with somebody who is emotionally abusive but not physically abusive, like kind of teetering on that line?
Probably every day. All abuse is emotional, and some of it's physical, some of it isn't. We get people arrested for non-physical scenarios. If a man and woman have an argument and he stands in the doorway and won't let her leave, he can get arrested for unlawful imprisonment. He didn't hit her, he didn't smack her, he just wasn't going to let her leave the room. And clearly that's a form of emotional abuse, as well as when there's one form of emotional abuse, there's often lots of others, right? There's all kinds of stuff. And even if they are physically abusive, we're looking at the emotional abuse. We're looking at the impact of control. I was talking about control earlier. A single controlling behavior might not be psychologically damaging, but the weight of ongoing controlling behavior is profoundly psychologically damaging. And it can be very benign stuff, but it's a lot of it can have a lot of weight. So we deal with emotional abuse all the time. Do people get arrested for it? Not necessarily. Let me tell you about one case that I think is germane to the whole conversation we're having here. I had a woman I was working with in counseling, and I worked with her for about a year, and she was in a bad relationship. She got out of it. She ended up marrying a guy that she thought was a great guy. He was in the military, he was respectful, and she ended up not being able to engage romantically with him. And we looked at all these different issues. And finally, one day I just said, is there any power and control going on? And this was during a couples session. And she said, oh my God, he tells me how to brush my teeth. He tells me what I can read and what I can't read. He tells me, and she started describing all this control. And so I looked at him and said, you want to treat this? He said, yeah, I do. And he did our group for 1.5 years voluntarily. Made a huge difference. And he never hit her. He never pushed her. He never threw anything, but he was incredibly controlling. And none of it was arrestable. He was never going to get arrested for what he was doing, but he was having a huge detrimental impact on his relationship. And he was willing to acknowledge it and work with it and deal with it because he wanted his relationship to be better. So he was on an autopilot response from whatever training or family history or whatever it was that was causing this. And he needed to learn something new. He needed to learn it was detrimental. He needed to learn it was problematic. He needed to know what controlling behavior was. He needed to understand the psychological impact of what he was doing. And he became willing to do that, and it made a huge difference in their lives. So we deal with those issues all the time. We probably deal with emotional abuse more than we deal with physical abuse, without a doubt. I mean, when guys come into class, they come in and tell us they did something physically abusive, but a lot more often they're telling us, well, I yelled at her, I screamed at her, I called her a name, I called her a profanity. You can imagine what those are. Or I pounded on the table real hard, or I slammed the door, or, they'll come in and talk about that, and they'll talk about the impact, or talk about how it scared her, scared the kids. Even the kids are in the other room, they hear it, they're impacted by it. So we deal with that a lot, without question.
Here's another question. How do you work with a client who has an active addiction, who is also abusing his or her partner? Do you combine the two groups? Do you combine the two in your groups, or do you have to work on them one at a time?
Domestic violence treatment is single gender only by state law. You can never have, I can't have a victim come into the agency. Used to be I couldn't have a victim come into the agency ever, period. Now I can't have the victim come into the agency if there's any chance he's going to be there. So we can't have them come in when he's in group or doing a one-on-one. So now we can have them come in, but we can never have them in the same room. And not only that, we're obligated to have conversations with her by state law, and we have to protect all that conversation. We can never tell him what she said because it puts her life in danger. And so we would never do treatment together. Now, if somebody has an addiction, we're going to recommend them drug and alcohol evaluation. And, by state law, we're going to do that. And they're to complete treatment, they're obligated to be able to complete domestic violence treatment. They're obligated to comply with what that recommendation says. If they go to Rainier Springs and get assessed or somewhere else and get assessed, they have to do what that assessment says before we can complete treatment. Same thing with mental health. If we send somebody for a mental health evaluation and they say, look, you need to do 20 sessions or 10 sessions, they got to do that before we can complete DV treatment. By state law, we have to. So I don't know if that answers the question. I hope it does.
I think so. There's a couple of people posting in the chat room if you guys want to take a look at it, just about some resources and links that people have found useful. So I'd encourage you guys to do that.
And I think I sent a link I'll just speak to it real briefly, a YouTube link.
Oh.
I interviewed 3 men who completed actually one of them completed, or 2 of them completed, and one I think was still in treatment. And I interviewed them about how they thought treatment was affecting their life. And I made a YouTube video on it. I had their permission to do it. I got releases. They wanted other people to see how treatment was working for them. And you can go to that video and watch it if you like. It was in the packet of stuff sent out.
I think I forgot to include that part. So we'll send it out with the certificates or we'll send it out with the quizzes as well. We'll add that link.
Cool. All right.
About 5 more minutes if there's any other questions or any final thoughts that you had. I know in the beginning some people were looking for some resources in the Vancouver areas as well.
What type of resources? We're obviously a resource in the Vancouver area for DV treatment and working with couples and counseling and all that. The YWCA is the resource for victims and advocates and victim services. Not sure what other resources you might need.
Here's a great question. What is the current or potential impact of COVID lockdown on this population and our general population?
For the people in our programs, my gosh, I mean, there's no question that it's ramping up problems. If they're still living together, they're now really living together, and there's no break if they're following the deal. And I realize some people are now out and about and doing more, but when it first started shut down and people weren't going to work and they weren't going out and they weren't doing anything, there's no question it was increasing problems. No question at all that that's true. What we did, hold on, my office manager's calling me. What we did in March is we converted our entire agency, including all of our groups, to telehealth in a 24-hour period, and all of our groups have continued via telehealth, via Zoom. And so, yeah, I mean, domestic violence is
done with the webinar.
very likely and very much on the rise as a result of COVID. There's no question that that's very likely true. I haven't seen any direct numbers because I don't know that there's been studies done on how much it's going up. What I can tell you is our programs are not getting smaller. I can tell you that. If anything, they're getting bigger. All of our programs have gotten bigger. All of our clinicians are mostly full with waiting lists, and all of our groups are filling up, and I'm needing to find more facilitators in-house to do groups. For me to train a facilitator, it's about at least a year process, even with lots of experience and lots of training, before they legally can lead a group. It's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to figure out how to make that happen, but we go after that. So I don't know if I missed anything. There's probably a ton of other stuff to say, but.
There is, we're just finishing up. There's a couple more questions, but maybe can I just have people reach out to you if they have more questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Yes. Well, we really appreciate that you are here talking to us. This is such a valuable perspective and understanding of the cycle of abuse and of domestic violence. So thank you very much for being here and doing that. And thank you to all the participants. We really appreciate that you all join us and make this a meaningful experience for us all.
I'll say one last thing. Thank you. I really enjoyed doing this. This is a heavy topic. Encourage everybody to go outside, take a breath of fresh air, and pull some joy and grace into your life.
I love that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, take care, everyone.